Hello everyone, and welcome back to another reading of Harry Potter. We are on Book 2, getting ready to start Chapter 7. I'm sorry for all the loud noise in the background. Chloe, can you close that back door, please? Thank you. My husband's mowing the grass. My daughter says she's going to do something loud. She won't tell me what it is, so I don't know. If you hear a bunch of weird noise, it's just because it's really loud in the background. But here we go. Chapter 7, Mudbloods and Murbers. Harry spent a lot of the time over the next few days dodging out of sight whenever he saw Gilderoy Lockhart coming down a corridor, harder to avoid than was Colin Creevey, who seemed to memorize Harry's schedule. Nothing seemed to give Colin a bigger thrill than to say, "All right, Harry," 6 or 7 times a day, or hear, "Hello, Colin," back, however, exasperated. Sorry, let me read that whole little thing over so that it makes sense. 6 or 7 times a day, and hear, "Hello, Colin," back, however exasperated Harry sounded when he said it. Hedwig was still angry with Harry about the disastrous car journey, and Ron's wand was still malfunctioning, surpassing itself on Friday morning by shooting out of Ron's hand in charms and hitting old Professor Flitwick squarely between the eyes, creating a large throbbing green boil where it had been struck. So, with one thing and another, Harry was quite glad to reach the weekend. He, Ron, and Hermione were planning to visit Hagrid on Saturday morning. Harry, however, was shaken awake several hours earlier than he would have liked by Oliver Wood, captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team. What's the matter?" said Harry groggily. "Quidditch practice," said Wood. "Come on." Harry squinted at the window. There was a thin mist hanging across the pink and gold sky. Now that he was awake, he couldn't understand how he could have slept through the racket the birds were making. "Oliver," Harry croaked, "it's the crack of dawn." "Exactly," said Wood. He was tall and burly, 6', and at the moment his eyes were gleaming with crazed enthusiasm. "It's part of our new training program. Come on, grab your broom, and let's go," said Wood heartily. "None of the other teams have started training yet. We're going to be the first off. We're going to make first this year." Yawning, shivering slightly, Harry climbed out of bed and tried to find his Quidditch robes. "Good man," said Wood. "Meet you in the field in 15 minutes. When he'd found his scarlet team robes and pulled on his cloak for warmth, Harry scribbled a note to Ron explaining where he'd gone and went down the spiral staircase to the common room, his Nimbus 2000 on his shoulder. He had just reached the portrait hole when there was a clatter behind him, and Colin Creevey came dashing down the spiral staircase, his camera swinging madly around his neck, and something clutched in his hand. "I heard someone saying your name on the stairs. Harry, look." Oh my gosh, my thing freaked out. There we go. "Harry, look what I've got here. I have it developed. I wanted to show you." Harry looked up beamishly at the photograph Colin was brandishing under his nose. A moving black and white Lockhart was tugging hard on an arm Harry recognized as his own. He was pleased to see that his photographic self was putting up a good fight and refusing to be dragged into view. As Harry watched, Lockhart gave up and slumped, panting against the white edge of the picture. "Will you sign it?" said Colin eagerly. "No," said Harry flatly, glancing around to check that the room was really deserted. "Sorry, Colin. I'm in a hurry. Quidditch practice." He climbed through the portrait hole. "Oh, wow! Wait for me. I never watched a Quidditch game before." Colin scrambled through the hole after him. "It'll be really boring," Harry said quickly, but Colin ignored him, his face shining with excitement. "You were the youngest house player in the 100 years, weren't you, Harry? Weren't you?" he said Colin, trotting alongside him. "You must be brilliant. I've never flown. Is it easy? Is that your broom? Is this the best one there is?" Harry didn't know how to get rid of him. It was like having an extremely talkative shadow. "I don't really understand Quidditch," said Colin breathlessly. "Is it true that there are 4 balls and 2 of them fly around, trying to knock people off their brooms?" "Yes," said Harry heavily, resigned to explain the complicated rules of Quidditch. "They're called bludgers. There are 2 beaters on each team who carry clubs and beat the bludgers away from their side. Fred and George Weasley are the Gryffindor beaters." "And what are the other balls for?" Colin asked, tripping down a couple of stairs because he was gazing open-mouthed at Harry. "Well, the quaffle, that's the bigger red one. It's the one that scores the goals. 3 chasers on each team throw the quaffle to each other, and they try to get it through the goalpost at the end of the pitch. There are 3 long poles with hoops on the end." "And the 4th ball?" "Is the golden snitch," said Harry, "and it's very small, very fast, and very difficult to catch. But that's what the seeker's got to do, because the game of Quidditch doesn't end until the snitch has been caught, and whichever seeker gets the snitch earns the team an extra 150 points. "And you're the Gryffindor seeker, aren't you?" said Colin in awe. "Yes," said Harry, as they left the castle and started across the dew-drenched grass. And then there's the keeper, too. He guards the goalposts. That's it, really. But Colin didn't stop questioning Harry all the way down the sloping lawns of the Quidditch field, and Harry only shook him off when they reached the changing rooms. Colin called after him in a piping voice, "I'll go and get a good seat, Harry," and hurried off to the stands. The rest of the Gryffindor team were already in the changing room. Wood was the only person who looked truly awake. Fred and George Weasley were sitting puffy-eyed and tousle-haired next to the fourth year, Alicia Spinnet, who seemed to be nodding off against the wall behind her. Her fellow chasers, Katie Bell and Angelina Johnson, were yawning side by side the opposite team. "There you are, Harry. What kept you?" said Wood briskly. "Now, I wanted a quick talk with you all before we actually go on the field, because I spent the summer devising a whole new training program, which I really think will make all the difference." Wood was holding up a large diagram of a Quidditch field, on which were drawn many lines and arrows and crosses in different colored inks. He took his own wand and tapped the board, and the arrows began to wiggle over the diagram like caterpillars. As Wood launched in his speech about his new tactics, Fred Weasley's head drooped right into Alicia Spinnet's shoulder, and she began to snore. The first board took nearly 20 minutes to explain, but there was another board under that, and a third under that. Harry sank into a stupor as Wood droned on and on. "So," said Wood, at long last jerking Harry from wistful fantasy about what he could be eating for breakfast at this very moment up in the castle, "is that clear? Are there any questions?" "I've got a question, Oliver," said George, who was woken with a start. "Why couldn't you have told us this yesterday, when we were awake?" Wood wasn't pleased. "Now you listen here," he said, glowering at all of them. "We should have won the Quidditch Cup last year. We're easily the best team, but unfortunately, owing to circumstances beyond our control—" Harry shifted guiltily in his seat. He had been unconscious in the hospital wing for the final match of the previous year, meaning that Gryffindor had been players short and had suffered their worst defeat in 300 years. Wood took a moment to regain control of himself. Their last defeat was clearly still torturing him. "So this year we train harder than ever before. Okay, let's go. Let's put our new theories into practice," Wood shouted, seizing his broomstick and leading the way out of the locker rooms. Stiff-legged and still yawning, his team followed. They had been in the locker room so long that the sun was up completely now. All the remnants of the mist hung over the grass and the stadium. As Harry walked into the field, he saw Ron and Hermione sitting in the stands. "Aren't you finished yet?" called Ron. Haven't even started," said Harry, looking jealously at the toast and marmalade Ron and Hermione had brought out of the great hall. "Wood's been teaching us new moves." He mounted his broomstick and kicked at the ground, soaring up in the sky. The cool morning air whipped his face, waking him more effectively than Wood's long talk. It felt wonderfully back on the Quidditch field. He soared right around the stadium at full speed, racing Fred and George. "What's that funny clicking noise?" called Fred as they hurtled across the corner. Harry looked into the stands. Colin was sitting in one of the highest seats, his camera raised, taking picture after picture, the sound strangely magnified in the deserted stadium. "Look this way, Harry, this way!" he cried shrilly. "Who's that?" said Fred. "No idea," Harry lied, putting a spurt of speed that took him as far away as possible from Colin. "What's going on?" said Wood, frowning, as he skimmed through the air toward them. "Why is that first year taking pictures? I don't like it. He could be a Slytherin spy, trying to find out about our new training program." "He's in Gryffindor," said Harry quickly. "And the Slytherins don't need a spy, Oliver," said George. "What makes you say that?" said Wood testily. "Because they're here in person," said George, pointing. Several people in green robes were walking on the field, broomsticks in their hands. "I don't believe it!" Wood hissed in outrage. "I booked the field today." "We'll see about this." Wood shot toward the ground, landing rather harder than he meant to in his anger, staggering slightly as he dismounted. Harry, Fred, and George followed. "Flint!" Wood bellowed at the Slytherin captain. "This is our practice time. We got up specially. Sounds weird. You can clear off now." Marcus Flint was even larger than Wood. He had a look of trollish cunning on his face as he replied, "No, there's plenty of room for all of us, Wood." Angelina, Alicia, and Katie came over too. There were no girls on the Slytherin team who stood shoulder to shoulder, facing the Gryffindors, leering to a man. "But I booked the field," said Wood, positively spitting with rage. "I booked it." "Ah," said Flint, "but I've got a specially signed note from Professor Snape. I, Professor Snape, give Slytherin team permission to practice today in the Quidditch field, owing to the need to train their new seeker." "You've got a new seeker?" said Wood, distracted. "Where?" and from behind the 6 large figures before them came a 7th smaller boy, smirking all over his pale, pointed face. It was Draco Malfoy. "Aren't you Lucius Malfoy's son?" said Fred, looking at Malfoy with dislike. "Funny you should mention Draco's father," said Flint, as the whole Slytherin team smiled more broadly. "Let me show you the generous gift he's made the Slytherin team." All 7 of them held out their broomsticks. 7 highly polished, brand new handles and 7 sets of fine gold lettering spelling the words Nimbus 2001 gleamed under Gryffindor's noses in the early morning sun. "These are the very latest model. Came out last month," said Flint carelessly flicking a speck of dust from the end of his own. "I believe it outstripes the old 2000 series by a considerable amount. As for the old clean sweeps," he said nastily as Fred and George, who were both clutching clean sweeps 5s, sweeps the board with them. None of the Gryffindor team could think of anything to say for that moment. Malfoy was smirking so broadly, his cold eyes were reduced to slits. "Oh, look," said Flint, "a field invasion." Ron and Hermione were crossing the grass to see what was going on. "What's happening?" Ron asked Harry. "Why aren't you playing? And what's he doing here?" He was looking at Malfoy, taking in his Slytherin Quidditch robes. "I'm the new Slytherin Seeker, Weasley," said Malfoy smugly. "Everyone's just been admiring the brooms my father bought our team." Ron gaped open-mouthed at the 7 superb broomsticks in front of him. "Good, aren't they?" said Malfoy smoothly. "But perhaps the Gryffindor team will be able to raise some gold and get new brooms too. You could raffle off those clean sweeps 5s. I expect the museum would bid for them." The Slytherin team howled with laughter. "At least no one on the Gryffindor team had to buy their way in," said Hermione sharply. "They got in on pure talent." The smug look on Malfoy's face flickered. "No one asked your opinion, you filthy little mudblood," he spat. Harry knew at once that Malfoy had said something really bad because there was an instant uproar in his words. Flint had to dive in front of Malfoy to stop Fred and George from jumping on him. Alicia shrieked, "How dare you!" and Ron plunged his hand into his robes and pulled out his wand, yelling, "You'll pay for that one, Malfoy!" and pointed furiously under Flint's arms at Malfoy's face. A loud bang echoed around the stadium, and a jet of green light shot out of the wrong end of Ron's wand, hitting him in the stomach and sending him reeling backward into the grass. Ron, are you okay?" squealed Hermione. Ron opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he gave an almighty belch, and several slugs dribbled out of his mouth onto his lap. The Slytherin team were paralyzed with laughter. Flint was doubled over, hanging on his new broomstick for support. Malfoy was on all fours, banging the ground with his fists. The Gryffindors were gathered around Ron, who kept belching large, disgusting slugs. Nobody seemed to want to touch him. "We better get him to Hagrid's. It's nearest," said Harry to Hermione, who nodded bravely, and the pair of them pulled Ron up by the arms. "What happened, Harry? What happened? Is he ill? But you can cure him, can't you?" Colin had run down from the seat and was now dancing alongside them as they left the field. Ron gave a huge heave and more slugs dribbled down his front. "Oh," said Colin, fascinated by raising his camera. "Can you hold him still, Harry?" "Get out of the way, Colin," said Harry angrily. He and Hermione supported Ron out of the stadium and across the grounds toward the edge of the forest. "Nearly there, Ron," said Hermione as the gamekeeper's cabin came into view. "You'll be all right in just a minute. We're almost there." They were within 20 feet of Hagrid's house when the door opened, but it wasn't Hagrid who emerged. Gilderoy Lockhart was wearing robes of the palest mauve today, came striding out. Quick behind here, Harry hissed, dragging Ron behind a nearby bush. Hermione followed somewhat reluctantly. "It's a simple matter, if you know what you're doing," Lockhart was saying loudly to Hagrid. "If you need help, you know where I am. I'll let you have a copy of my book. I'm surprised you haven't already got one. I'll sign one tonight and send it over. Well, goodbye." And he strode away toward the castle. Harry waited until Lockhart was out of sight, and then pulled Ron out of the bush and up to Hagrid's front door. They knocked urgently. Hagrid appeared once, looking very grumpy, but his expression brightened when he saw who it was. "Been wondering when you'd come to see me. Come on in. Thought you might been Professor Lockhart back again." Harry and Hermione supported Ron over the threshold and into the one-room cabin, which had an enormous bed in one corner and a fire crackling merrily in the other. Hagrid didn't seem perturbed by Ron's slug problem, which Harry hastily explained as he lowered Ron to a chair. Better out than in, he said cheerfully, plunking a large copper basin in front of him. Get 'em all up, Ron. I don't think there's anything to do except wait for him to stop, said Hermione anxiously, watching Ron bend over the basin. That's a difficult curse to work at the best of times. But with a broken wand, Hagrid was bustling around making them some tea. His boarhound, Fang, was slobbering over Harry. What did Lockhart want with you, Hagrid? Harry asked, scratching Fang's ears. Give me advice on getting kelpies out of the well, growled Hagrid, moving a half-plucked rooster off his scrub table and setting down the teapot. Like I don't know, and banging on about some banshee he banished. In one word, if one word of it be true, I'll eat my kettle. It was most unlike Hagrid to criticize a Hogwarts teacher, and Harry looked at him with surprise. Hermione, however, said in a voice somewhat higher than usual, I think you're being a bit unfair. Professor Dumbledore obviously thought he was the best man for the job. He was the only man for the job, said Hagrid, offering them a plate of that's not right. That would be kind of gross. Treacle toffee, while Ron coughed squelchily in his basin. And I mean, the only one. Getting very difficult to find anyone in the dark arts job. People aren't too keen to take on. See? They're starting to get jinx. They're starting to think it's jinx. No one lasted long for a while, so you tell me. Hagrid was jerking his head around to Ron. Who was he trying to curse? Malfoy called Hermione something. It must have been really bad because everyone went wild. It was bad, said Ron hoarsely, emerging over the tabletop looking pale and sweaty. Malfoy called her mudblood, Hagrid. Ron died out of sight again as a fresh wave of slubs made their appearance. Hagrid looked outraged. He didn't, he growled at Hermione. He did, she said, but I don't know what it means. I could tell it was really rude, of course. It's about the most insulting thing he could think of, gasped Ron, coming back up. Mudblood's a really foul name for someone who is muggle-born, you know, non-magic parents. There are some wizards, like Malfoy's family, who think that they're better than everyone else because they're what people call pure blood. He gave a small burp and a single slug fell out into his outstretched hand. He threw it into the basin and continued. I mean, the rest of us know it doesn't make any difference at all. Look at Neville Longbottom. He's a pure blood, and he can hardly stand a cauldron right up. And they haven't invented a spell that Hermione can't do, said Hagrid proudly, making Hermione go a brilliant shade of magenta. It's a disgusting thing to call someone, said Ron, wiping his sweaty brow and shaking his hand. Dirty blood, see? Common blood. It's ridiculous. Most wizards these days are half-blood anyway. If we hadn't married muggles, we'd have died out. He retched and ducked out of sight again. Well, I don't blame you for trying to curse him, Ron, said Hagrid loudly over the thuds of more slugs hitting the basin. But maybe it was a good thing that your wand backfired. Expect Lucius Malfoy would have come marching up to your school if he got his cursed son. Last year not in trouble. Harry would have pointed out that trouble didn't come much worse than having slugs pouring out of your mouth, but he couldn't. Hagrid's treacle toffee had cemented his jaws together. Harry, said Hagrid abruptly, as though struck by a sudden thought, got a bone to pick with ya. I've heard you've been giving out signed photos. How come I haven't got one? Furious, Harry wrenched his teeth apart. I have not been giving out signed photos, he said hotly. Hotly. I don't think hotly would make sense. Hotly. If Lockhart's still spreading that around, but then he saw Hagrid was laughing. I'm only joking, he said, patting Harry on the back and sending him face first into the table. I knew you hadn't really. I told Lockhart you didn't need to. You're more famous than him without trying. Well, I bet he didn't like that, said Harry, sitting up and rubbing his chin. Don't think he did, said Hagrid, his eyes twinkling. And then I told him I never read one of his old books, and he decided to go. Treacle toffee, Ron? He added as Ron reappeared. No thanks, said Ron weakly. I better not risk it. Come on, let's see what I've been a-growing. Come on and see what I've been growing, said Hagrid, as Harry and Hermione finished the last of their tea. In the small vegetable patch behind Hagrid's house were a dozen of the largest pumpkins Harry had ever seen. Each one was the size of a large boulder. Getting on well, aren't they? Said Hagrid happily. For the Halloween feast. Should be big enough by then. What have you been feeding them? Said Harry. Hagrid looked over his shoulder to check that they were alone. Well, I've been giving him, a bit of help. Harry noticed Hagrid's flowery pink umbrella leaning against the back wall of the cabin. Harry had reason to believe before now that this umbrella was not at all what it looked like. In fact, he had the strong impression that Hagrid's old school wand was concealed inside of it. Hagrid wasn't supposed to use magic. He'd been expelled from Hogwarts in his 3rd year, but Harry had never found out why. Any mention of the matter to Hagrid would clear his throat loudly and become mysteriously deaf on the subject when the subject was changed. An engorgement charm, I suppose, said Hermione, halfway between disapproval and amusement. Well, you've done a good job on them. That's what your little sister said Hagrid, nodding at Ron. I met her just yesterday. Hagrid looked sideways at Harry, his beard twitching. Said she was just looking round the grounds, but I reckon she was hoping she might run into someone else at my house. He winked at Harry. If you ask me, she wouldn't say no to a signed... Oh, be quiet, said Harry. Ron snorted with laughter and the ground sprayed with slugs. Watch it, Hagrid roared, pulling Ron away from his precious pumpkins. It was nearly lunchtime and Harry had only had one big of treacle toffee since dawn. He was keen to go back to school and eat. They said goodbye to Hagrid and walked back to the castle, Ron hiccuping occasionally, but only bringing up 2 very small slugs. They had barely set foot in the school entrance when a voice rang out. There you are, Potter! Weasley! Professor McGonagall was walking toward them, looking stern. You will both do your detentions this evening. What are we doing, Professor? Said Ron, nervously suppressing a burp. You will be polishing the silver in the trophy room with Mr. Filch, said Professor McGonagall. And no magic, Weasley, elbow grease. Ron gulped. Argus Filch, the caretaker, was loathed by everyone at the school. And you, Potter? You will be helping Professor Lockhart answer his fan mail, said Professor McGonagall. Oh no, Professor, I can go to the trophy room too, please, said Harry desperately. Certainly not, said Professor McGonagall, raising her eyebrows. Professor Lockhart requested you particularly. 8 o'clock sharp, both of you. Harry and Ron slouched in the great hall in states of the deepest gloom, Hermione behind them wearing a, well, you did break the school rules sort of expression. Harry didn't enjoy shepherd's pie as much as he thought. Both he and Ron felt like they got the worst deal. Filch will have me there all night, said Ron, heavily. No magic. There must be about 100 cups in that room. I'm no good at muggle cleaning. I'll swap any time, said Harry, hollowly. It's like hollowly? That's a fun word. I've had loads of practice with the Dursleys. Answering Lockhart's fan mail, he'll be a nightmare. Saturday afternoon seemed to melt away in what seemed like no time. It was 5 minutes to 8 and Harry was dragging his feet along the second-floor corridor to Lockhart's office. He gritted his teeth and knocked. The door flew open, and Lockhart beamed down at him. Ah, here's the scallywag, he said. Come in, Harry, come in. Shining brightly on the walls, by the light of many candles, were countless framed photographs of Lockhart himself. He even had signed a few of them. Another large pile lay on his desk. You can address the envelopes, Lockhart told Harry, as though this was a huge treat. The first one's to Gladys Grudgeon, bless her, a huge fan of mine. The minutes snailed by. Harry let Lockhart's voice wash over him, occasionally saying, and right, and yeah. Now and then he caught a phrase like, fame's a fickle friend, Harry, or celebrity is as celebrity does, remember that. The candle burns lower and lower, making the light dance over the many moving faces of Lockhart watching him. Harry moved his aching hand over what felt like the 1,000th envelope, writing out, Veronica Smelthley's address. It must be nearly time to leave, Harry thought. Miserably, please let it be nearly time. And then he heard something quite apart from the spitting of the dying candles, and Lockhart prattled about his fans. It was a voice chilled to the bone marrow, a voice breaking, a breathtaking, ice-cold venom. Come to me. Let me rip you, let me tear you, let me kill you. Harry gave a huge jump, and a large lilac bolt appeared on Veronica Smelthy's street. What? He said loudly. I know, said Lockhart. 6 solid months at the top of the bestseller list, broke all records. No, said Harry frantically, that voice. Sorry, said Lockhart, looking puzzled. What voice? That voice that said, didn't you hear it? Lockhart was looking at Harry with astonishment. What are you talking about, Harry? Perhaps you're getting a little drowsy. Great Scott, look at the time. We've been here nearly 4 hours, and I've never believe it. The time's flown, hasn't it? Harry didn't answer. He was straining his ears to hear the voice again, but there was no sound now except for Lockhart telling him he mustn't expect a treat like this every time he got detention. Feeling dazed, Harry left. It was so late that the Gryffindor common room was almost empty. Harry went straight up to the dormitory. Ron wasn't even back yet. Harry pulled on his pajamas and got to bed and waited. Half an hour later, Ron arrived, nursing his right arm and bringing a strong smell of polish into the darkened room. My muscles are all seized up, he groaned, sinking on the bed. 14 times he made me buff that Quidditch cup before he was satisfied. And then I had another slug attack all over a special award for service to the school. Took ages to get the slime off. How was it with Lockhart? Keeping his voice low to not wake Neville, Dean, and Seamus, Harry told Ron exactly what he heard. And Lockhart said he couldn't hear it? Said Ron. Harry could see him frowning in the moonlight. Do you think he's lying? But I don't get it. Even someone invisible would have to open the door. I know, said Harry, lying back on his four-poster bed, staring at the canopy above him. I don't get it either. Ooh, looks like a mystery. Alright, we'll be starting Chapter 8, The Death Day Party. That sounds like an adventure. Next time, have a wonderful day, and I will see you guys later.